Ever since World of Warcraft added its first class in Wrath of the Lich King, people have been begging for a bard. And I totally get it, like the idea of running out and playing your instrument to inspire your allies and summon all sorts of magic is really awesome, and some MMOs have done it really well, like... Yeah, who doesn't want that? And there's been rumors, of course, every expansion that we're finally going to get bards, but I feel like this is it. This is the one. The next expansion, because they're adding a bunch of role-playing things, they're adding housing, they're finally going to add bards to bring people back and give us what we've wanted for so long. And yes, there'll be people who say, well, I don't want bard. I get it. There will always be people who don't want it either, but I just Googled WoW forums bard, and these are all the sort of things that popped up that clearly people have been asking for a while for this. So I thought it'd be really fun to do a video on what would every race have as like a racial instrument. We've seen them give us like the racial armor that's really cool, that kind of is a heritage and homage to the roots of that race. So if we got bards and bards were available to every race, what would those racial instruments look like? I'm going to start with what I believe to be the easiest choice. Now, I went out to like each racial starting area to make this video to like listen to, okay, what does their starter area music sound like when they're first starting their journey in their racial heritage area? What really encompasses them the best? And honestly, the music for this area just wasn't it. The Undead are very clearly punk / metalhead, like it's been there since day one. And like, look at them. You can't tell me that this isn't meant to be like a punk or metalhead. You've got the leather, you've got mohawks, you've got all sorts of hairstyles that are just, oh, so peak. So yes, I want to use like what WoW gives us, the music they give us to really make this list, but the Undead with their dance, with their mohawks, it was clear to me that they are the one that's going to be the exception. I'm not going to use their starter music. Instead, they clearly need to use the metal guitar or a metal bass. Like, it just looks so right, and there's even the in-game band Blightbore. You have it, like, this is clearly, if we get Undead bards, they need to have an electric bass or an electric guitar. Hands down, that is their racial heritage item for certain. Next up, we're going to do the Tauren, and you would think this one would be super easy, but here's the dilemma I have with them. Like, the flute seems like the obvious choice with a lot of their music you hear in Mulgore or their starting zones or Thunder Bluff, like the flute seems obvious, but I believe it belongs to a different race that we'll get to later, so they need a different instrument, and honestly, only one other instrument comes to mind with the Tauren. And that is the drums. All their tracks feature drums, and they're really awesome. The problem is there's another race that I feel the drums belong to as well, kind of like the problem with the flute. And that is the orcs. Back in the day of the RTS, we had like the Kodo War Beast with the orc on the back who was drumming it, and that was absolutely iconic. In the days of Warlords of Draenor, we saw some orc drummers there as well. Like, it's part of them. But also you have like ETC has a Tauren drummer. The thing is, both of their cultures are so intertwined. The Orc and Tauren really do go hand in hand for a lot of the lore. So while I did want to have every race have its unique own like instrument and no one overlap, I just don't see a way to not have a little bit of overlap, especially between these two races. Now obviously there's a ton of different drums, right? So they could have unique drums to them or different kinds of drums, but overall I think both Orc and Tauren deserve the drums. Up next, we're going to do the Gnomes. Now, I thought the Gnome was going to be easy, but here's where I had a little bit issue with the Gnomes, is obviously there's always been a theme of Gnomes versus Goblins, so I wanted the Gnomes and Goblins to have opposing instruments. However, when I asked a few different role players and other people in the community about what instruments they would give different races, so many people find, because of the Undermine expansion stuff we have going on right now, that Goblins and Jazz are just, they go hand in hand. And I don't disagree with that. It gave goblins a ton of lore, a ton of culture, a lot more to their characters, so I'm happy for it. I'm happy that the goblins get jazz and saxophones or whatever it may be. But it's a lot harder to do that with what I'm trying to do with the Gnomes versus Goblins, because I thought, okay, electric instruments. On one hand, you could have like a theremin, on the other hand, you could have like the omniharp or the omnicore or synthesizers or guitars, or there's so many different electric instruments that I really wanted to have the iconic gnomes versus goblins, but I can't dispute that I really do feel like goblins and jazz go hand in hand now. So with that said, I wanted the gnomes to still have something that represents like technology. So for that, we step into Gnomergon, and Gnomergon, I've always enjoyed their track. You have like this really, I won't say alien, but like this techie beat kind of going on in the background. You've probably heard it playing in the background of this video. The more that I'm doing this video, I realize I know almost nothing about music, and that's also making this very hard. But to get those strange sounds and to encompass the strangeness of the gnomes and their quirky technology, I do feel like the only true good instrument for a gnome would be to have the theremin device. Now, if you don't know it by name, you may have never seen it, but I guarantee you've heard it before because this is what it sounds like. And to me, that totally encompasses like the gnome culture, the unnecessary invention, the thing other people might not understand that kind of looks a little different or a little strange, but is incredibly useful, and a lot of people do find use for it. So I feel like that's very much gnomes. So gnomes get the theremin device. Now I'm only going to do one more simply because I did not realize how long this was going to take to go through all the races. Sometimes you forget just how many like races and sub races that World of Warcraft has, and I'm not out here trying to make like a 30-minute video. So obviously if you've been watching the screen, you'll know one of my favorite is the Pandaren, so let's do the Pandaren last. Now, Blizzard did do like a retrospective of the Mists of Pandaria, like a behind the scenes talking about different parts of the expansion, what they liked, what they didn't like, what didn't work. And part of that, they talked about the music. And in that music selection, they specifically named 4 instruments that they focused on because, as they said, they wanted a very certain sound with, as they quote said, Asian themes to it, which is obvious with Pandaren and where they draw their inspiration from. So I chose from one of those 4 instruments. And I chose the Erhu, which I do believe is featured in quite a few of the songs. I'll throw an image up here for you. And when you see it, you'll know, oh, okay, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, I hear those all the time in any sort of movie that features this sort of music. Now, I did consider, should the Pandaren have different racial instruments if they chose Horde or Alliance? Because there is, as they explain in like the starter quest at least, a fundamental difference between the 2 sets of Pandaren in their philosophy. And that sort of philosophy can sometimes impact how someone expresses themselves, whether that be through art or music or things of that nature. However, they are still all one people of Pandaren, so despite those maybe philosophical difference, I don't think that should be reflected in their art in their instrument. I do think they should have one unifying instrument. This one is obviously debatable. There's a lot of other instruments that are very iconic to the sound of Pandaria, so I would not be opposed to someone saying, you're wrong, use this different instrument. With that said, we've reached the part of the video where it's your turn to participate. Obviously, I didn't cover every race here, so put down below what race you want me to cover next if you want a part 2. This took a lot of time to do just these ones, and like I said, there's a whole lot of races in World of Warcraft, so there's much more to cover, and if you disagree with any of my choices, I'd love to hear why and what you would select for the different races as an iconic instrument to them if we do get Bards. And finally, of course, everyone cross your fingers that we do get Bards, because that is the class I want next, unless we can get Tinkerers, but that's a whole different discussion and a whole different railroad, so we won't even get into that here. So thank you as always for watching, and have a blessed day.